Beth, you attended that. I don't know if you want to say anything.
Most probably just two things. One is that I'd really encourage board members to complete a feedback form if you go to a meeting. And in terms of the relevance for Healthwatch Newcastle, because it helps us focus our work, but also helps us build the evidence around the work that we need to do, but also about our relationships. Now, the Care Quality Commission had their board meeting in Newcastle in November. And what I didn't know, but now do know, is that the Care Quality Commission's administrative arm is actually based in Newcastle at Citygate. They have about 500 employees, and we've been invited to go and meet with them and see what sort of work they do there, because they've got a public call line and they get a lot of calls. And one of the reasons why the CQC held their board meeting in Newcastle was that they could actually go and spend some time there themselves the morning of the board meeting. I'll circulate an email from the manager of that unit who has invited me to go and meet with them, and I'm quite keen to take up that invitation, and also anybody else that would like to come. But what came across loud and clear to me with this particular meeting, and where this is feedback from a meeting, this was the Care Quality Commission who actually hold Healthwatch in high regard. They do see them as a potential source for public information and feedback. This is great on one hand, but on the other I had sort of shivers going down my spine, because the CQC do a lot of inspection work, and if they're wanting Healthwatch, local Healthwatch, to be involved with that, it's the whole industry in itself. So it was great that I had the opportunity to have that discussion with the board. There was a dinner the night before. I thought there'd be lots of people there, and there weren't. There was just three of us, three different people being invited, a foundation trust chief exec, a chief exec from the voluntary and community sector, and myself. But it was a good opportunity to be able to promote Healthwatch Newcastle in the way that we would like to work in our locality, and have the opportunity to talk about the vision, method and compact around the relationships we're developing. It was good to emphasise the leanness of the team with our limited resources, and they really liked when I described the Ofsted method of 1, 2, 3. They felt that was a really very appropriate way to work. And also the fact that we were building relationships with others, and in particular the Health and Scrutiny Committee, because a lot of the stuff that's on their agenda is on ours as well. It's just that we come at it from a slightly different angle, but it's great synergies. So I suppose what came out for me were the two things about firstly being able to get Healthwatch Newcastle on their radar, but also about how they see Healthwatch as being quite important to them in their work. Has anybody got any questions of me in terms of what I've recommended for the board on that paper?
I think CQC is an interesting organisation because it's got so many different roles, and one of them of course is being responsible for Healthwatch England. So there's already that relationship. I do think we need to be careful about what our role is in relation to regulation and inspection, because that was never intended to be the role of Healthwatch. So I think there's an issue about being able to provide really useful information from a patient or service user or carer perspective, but that's our role. And I wouldn't like to see getting pulled into formal inspections. I mean, quite clearly, the team get the reports on a weekly basis. We can see the facilities which are under question, and that might be something you want to look at in the future. The other side of this you might want to mention, might be mentioned later on, is the CQC are doing a particular piece of work on dementia in Newcastle, and they're calling for evidence, and Healthwatch Newcastle are promoting that at the moment. So I think it's just to say, yes, they're there, we want to have a good relationship with them, but we are independent, and I'm just slightly concerned, and also some of the stuff that's coming out of Healthwatch England, which actually don't have a regulatory role in response to ourselves. I mean, we're quite clearly responsible to the people of Newcastle and the City Council, our Commissioner. So there is an element of confusion, and some of the Healthwatch England information comes out, I think it's quite top-down, and there's an expectation there that local Healthwatch are going to be their eyes and ears on the ground, and that's not supposed to be their role.
Thanks, Sally. Relevant points. We've talked about this before, that we do need to remain independent, and that was why I had the great opportunity to talk to the CQC and say, you know, we are local and we'll represent the people of Newcastle. But you know, when Stephen Fields is coming along to look at primary care, if we've got input from a public and patient point of view, it's most probably worth sharing. So yeah, take on board all of that. And of course our independent Health Watch England. I did pick up a little about a little frustration that when the response to the Francis report didn't really strengthen local Health Watch in terms of what Health Watch England think it should be, with standardised structures and processes and accountability. So we're local, we're going to remain local and accountable to the public of Newcastle. Anything else from the board? No?
I think that one of the important concepts in looking at all of this is the concept of proportionality, because we are resourced, in my view, not even sufficiently to do the job we're required to do, quite apart from meeting the expectations of all the other parties who think that Health Watch is going to help them deliver their things. And so that we need to have a very clear idea of what it is we're seeking to do and the way we're seeking to do it. And that may be as, if you like, the receptacle for loads and loads of intelligence around health and social care, which then gets played back to whichever party needs it for whatever purpose they need it. But we don't do the doing. We can't possibly do the doing. And so we need to not just be clear ourselves about what our role is, we need to articulate it so that everybody else understands it as well. And to be fair, I think every new organisation suffers from this. Because it's a new organisation, anybody developing policy or procedure or whatever thinks, oh, I know, they could do this, that and the other. And we've got to be very clear for ourselves and for other people what it is we're here to do. And of course, if we can enable other people to do their job more effectively by doing our job, we will, but we won't change our job to meet their needs.
It was really just to echo much of what Jill said, and to suggest that there's a certain irony in seeking to get public, patient and carer and service user views and opinions and feedback on what works and what doesn't work, and then impose from the centre a certain kind of solution, instead of having locally determined solutions and ways of working. And I think as Health Watch Newcastle, we ought to be careful to avoid mission creep and having stuff lumped onto us, because there's very little in the budget at all to do anything, let alone that with which we are currently tasked, let alone, and you know, that's before we begin to consider all the stuff that could get thrown in our direction, but also to resist some of the rhetoric as well, which might be coming from CQC and Health Watch England. They're very good at telling people what they should be doing, as opposed to doing themselves what they have a statutory duty to do. And so we shouldn't end up doing their work for them and their bidding on our budget.
Thanks, Jill and Alistair. I think we can agree with your comments, and we have to just keep reminding ourselves what we're here for, and be firm when we do meet our partners outside that that's what we're about. Is there anything else? No. Right. Just turn the agenda back over there. Areas of work for consideration. Now, we're going to ask Sally to talk about the Better Care Fund and integration of health and social care. And I'm sorry this isn't on the agenda, we haven't got any papers, but this is something that's really just become important to us in the last 6 days.
Okay, the Better Care Fund. You might have missed this one because in June when it was launched it was called the Integration Transformation Fund. So this is a bit shorter and catchier. The first thing to say is that this is about the integration of health and social care, which people have talked about for years and years and years, and there is no new money. So the fund that is being launched is actually existing money. Some of that's, well, quite a lot of that's actually through health. Some's from the sort of CCG reablement money, some's capital, some is the carers fund, do you remember that one? So when you put that together, you end up with about £1.1 million in 14-15 and £3.8 million in 15-16. And you've got to remember what I said, that's actually supporting existing services. And if we're pushing how to make organisations work better together, it's always very hard. You're trying to set new things up whilst at the same time trying to keep things going. The government have asked each of the local authority areas, so there's going to be 152 in England, to come up with a set of plans, initially by the 14th of February, and then affirm them fully by the 4th of April. So you're talking about a very, very short time scale, although there's already been quite a lot of work